The first indication that something was terribly wrong on transatlantic Flight 88 wasn't a scream or a gunshot. It was the sudden, jarring silence that fell over the first-class cabin. One moment, the air was filled with the pleasant hum of conversation and the clinking of ice in glasses. The next, a man with a volcanic temper and a crumpled business plan had fallen silent, his face pale as he stared at the compact black handgun now leveled at his temple. And the man holding the gun wasn't wearing a ski mask or military fatigues. He was dressed in a rumpled brown suit, his tie loosened, his face etched with a desperate, frantic energy that was far more frightening than cold, professional calm. He looked like a failed accountant, which, in a way, he was. His name was Viktor Petrov, and his life's savings, embezzled from a firm in Minsk, were about to be discovered. This flight to New York was his last desperate gamble. But as the hours passed and the vast Atlantic stretched beneath them, the enormity of his failure had curdled into a wild, catastrophic plan. "Nobody move!" he shouted, his voice cracking. The sound was swallowed by the sudden collective gasp of 30 passengers. Two other men, equally desperate and equally terrified, rose from their seats. One, a large man with a shaved head named Gregor, pulled a fire axe from a bulkhead. He'd disabled the safety seal hours ago. The other, a wiry, nervous man named Sergei, produced a box cutter. The flight attendants, trained for conflict de-escalation, froze. One of them, a veteran named Nancy, started to step forward, her hands raised. "Sir, please, put the weapon down. We can land the plane. We can talk about this." Victor swung the gun towards her, his eyes wild. "Talk? There is no talk. Sit down. Everyone sit down and be quiet. We are going to take this plane somewhere else. We are in control now." The command was absolute. Passengers ducked in their seats, some sobbing quietly. Nancy was shoved back into her jump seat by Gregor. The cockpit door, reinforced after the tragedies of decades past, was their primary target. Sergei rushed to it and began pounding on the heavy wood. "Open! Open now!" he screamed. Inside the cockpit, Captain Mark Holbrook and First Officer Lena Vance felt their blood run cold. The pounding was unmistakable. Mark immediately grabbed the radio. "Mayday, mayday, mayday! This is Transatlantic 88. We have a hijacking attempt in progress in the cabin. I repeat, we are being breached." The controller in Gander, Newfoundland, acknowledged, his voice tight with alarm. But before any further instructions could be given, the pounding stopped. The men outside, frustrated, weren't trying to break the door down. They had another plan. A new voice crackled over the cabin's intercom, but it wasn't from the cockpit. It was Victor, using the handset from a galley phone. "Why, pilots, you will listen to me. I have a hostage, a woman. I will put the phone to her head. You will hear her die unless you open this door and come out. You have 1 minute." A cold, heavy silence filled the cockpit. Lena looked at Mark, her face ashen. "Mark, we can't. If we open that door, they're in. They'll kill us and take the plane. And if we don't, he'll kill her," Mark whispered, his hand trembling on the yoke. He was a good pilot, a family man. He wasn't trained for this. He was trained for engine failures and wind shear, not moral impossibilities. The intercom crackled again. A woman's terrified scream pierced the silence, abruptly cut off. 30 seconds! Victor's voice was a triumphant snarl. Mark's shoulders slumped. He couldn't live with that sound in his ears. He reached for the door-locking mechanism. "I'm sorry, Lena, I can't." Just then, a third voice entered their frantic world. It wasn't on the radio or the intercom. It was a soft, calm voice coming from the small service door that led from the cockpit to the forward galley. "Captain, do not open that door." Both pilots spun around. Standing in the doorway was Sarah, one of the flight attendants. But it wasn't the Sarah they knew, the efficient, smiling woman who served coffee and checked seatbelts. This Sarah had a different look in her eyes. It was a look of absolute, unnerving focus. She was a woman in her late 40s, with neat auburn hair and a calm, pleasant face. But at that moment, she seemed to fill the small cockpit with an invisible force. "Sarah, get back to your seat," Mark ordered, his voice strained. "It's not safe." "Captain," she said, her voice still that calm, quiet murmur, but it cut through his panic like a blade. "I have more experience with hostage situations than you do. Trust me. Do not open that door." Lena stared at her. "What are you talking about?" Sarah didn't answer. Instead, she looked at the instruments, the radar, at the endless black sky ahead. Her mind wasn't on the cramped cockpit of a Boeing 777. It was in another place, another time. The roar of the engines wasn't the hum of a commercial jet. It was the thunder of afterburners. The dark sky wasn't over the Atlantic. It was over the Balkans. Years ago, another woman, younger and known by a different name, had sat in a cockpit just as cramped, but one filled with the acrid smell of jet fuel and the cold sweat of fear. That cockpit was in a rusty MiG-21, a part of a tiny, beleaguered air force during the Yugoslav wars. That woman's name was Major Sanja Jankovic. She'd been one of the few, a legend in a tiny, forgotten air force. Her call sign was Vila, the Serbian word for a mythical warrior fairy. She'd flown close air support for surrounded ground troops, dodged surface-to-air missiles with a calm that bordered on suicidal, and had once landed a plane with half its tail section shot away. She'd been a ghost, or a rumor the enemy couldn't confirm. She'd survived the war, but the peace had been harder. Her skills, her very identity, had become a liability in a new, peaceful world. She'd emigrated, buried her past under a new name, Sarah, and found a life of quiet anonymity in the skies, serving drinks and calming nervous flyers. It was a job that demanded patience, not predator instincts. Until now. The minute was up. The sound of the cabin door being wrenched open echoed through the plane. Victor's voice roared, enraged. "You think I am bluffing? Gregor, the woman, bring her here!" Sanja, Sarah, moved. She didn't run. She glided. She slipped back through the service door into the galley just as Gregor dragged a hysterical young woman towards the cockpit door. The passengers were all facing forward, their eyes glued to the scene at the front. No one saw the flight attendant slide a heavy metal coffee carafe from its burner. As Gregor passed the galley, dragging the screaming woman, as Sarah moved, it wasn't a flight attendant's movement. It was a predator's strike. The heavy carafe, filled with scalding coffee, swung in a flat, brutal arc and connected with the side of Gregor's head with a sickening, wet thud. He crumpled instantly, a dead weight. The woman stumbled free, her screams turning to choked sobs of shock. In the same fluid motion, Sarah was on Gregor. She didn't check his pulse. She didn't try to comfort the hostage. She stripped off his belt, but looped it around his wrists and pulled it tight with a practiced, efficient twist. She then dragged him into a small equipment closet and locked it. All of this took less than 15 seconds. She then turned to the trembling young woman. "Get down. Stay down behind the seats. Don't look up." Her voice wasn't the soft, caring tone of a flight attendant anymore. It was the voice of a commander. The girl obeyed without question. Sarah then calmly walked back into the main cabin. Dom Victor and Sergei were at the front, their backs to her, peering into the small, empty galley area, confused. They had heard the commotion, but it had been too fast. "Where is Gregor?" Sergei hissed. "Right here," a voice said from behind them. They spun. A flight attendant stood there holding nothing, no weapon, just standing there, in the aisle, blocking their way to the rest of the plane. Victor raised his gun, his hand shaking. "You! What did you do? Where is my man?" Sarah's eyes, are calm and gray, met his. They held no fear. They held a patient, chilling assessment. It was the look of a master duelist sizing up a clumsy opponent. "He's taking a nap," she said softly. "You should too. Put the gun down. It's over." Victor's face contorted in rage. "Over! It is not over! I have the gun! I am in charge!" He took a step towards her, waving the pistol. Sergei, emboldened, lunged with his box cutter. It was a clumsy, desperate move. Sarah didn't retreat. She flowed to the side. Her hand snapping out to grab Sergei's wrist, she used his own momentum, twisting and pulling him forward. He stumbled past her, crashing headfirst into a bulkhead and collapsing in a heap. Victor stared, his brain unable to process what he'd just seen. A middle-aged woman in a polyester uniform had just disarmed two men in the blink of an eye. He raised the gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. The passengers screamed and dove for the floor. In the cockpit, listening on the speaker, Lena's blood ran cold. She heard the scream, the scuffle, and then a single, terrifying sound. A gunshot. But the bullet didn't hit Sarah. It didn't hit anyone. As Victor's finger tightened, she had already moved. Her body dropped, twisted, and her legs swept out in a low, powerful arc, catching him behind the knees. He toppled backward like a felled tree. As he fell, his finger clenched reflexively, firing the gun into the ceiling of the first-class cabin with a deafening crack. The sound was lost in the thud of his body hitting the floor. The pistol skittered away from his nerveless fingers. Sarah was on him in an instant, her knee on his chest, pinning him. She looked down at him, her expression not of triumph, but of a weary disappointment. "I told you to put it down," she said quietly. She looked up at the terrified, gaping faces of the passengers. "Is everyone okay?" Her voice was back to that of a calm, professional flight attendant. It was a jarring, surreal transition. "Nancy, can you get some zip ties? And check on the young woman in the galley." Nancy, the senior flight attendant, stumbled forward, her face a mask of awe. She handed Sarah a handful of heavy-duty zip ties from an emergency kit. Sarah bound Victor's wrists and ankles with the same cold efficiency she'd shown with Gregor. The immediate danger was over. The plane was quiet, save for the steady drone of the engines and the sound of muffled sobs. Sarah stood up. She looked at the small, scared group of passengers peeking over their seats, at the two unconscious men, at the whimpering Victor at her feet. She then looked towards the cockpit door. It opened a crack. Lena's face appeared, pale and drawn. Is it safe?" Sarah nodded. "It's safe. You have two subdued hijackers and one unconscious. The cockpit is secure." Mark Holbrook appeared behind Lena, his eyes wide. He looked at the scene in the first-class cabin, then at Sarah. And his brain was struggling to reconcile the woman who had just served him a turkey sandwich with the figure standing over the bound men. "Who? What? How?" Sarah walked toward the cockpit. She paused at the door, her hand on the frame. She looked at the endless, dark sky through the windscreen. The Atlantic was a vast, indifferent blackness below them. The stars were sharp and cold above. "Captain," she said, her voice dropping to that low, calm murmur they'd heard before. We have a situation to manage. 3 subdued hostiles. We need to inform ground control and decide on the nearest suitable airport for landing. Perhaps we could continue to New York? The aircraft is undamaged. The passengers are shaken, but safe. There's no need for a major diversion. It would cause unnecessary panic." Mark stared at her, his mouth agape. She was talking about flight plans. She had just single-handedly stopped a hijacking, and she was worried about the schedule. Lena, however, was looking at Sarah with a new, piercing gaze. The way she stood, the way she'd assessed the tactical situation, the calm under fire. It wasn't the training of a flight attendant. It was something else entirely. "That was incredible. Where did you learn to do that?" Sarah met her gaze. For a fleeting second, the mask slipped. Lena saw something in those gray eyes, a profound, ancient weariness, a landscape of memories filled with smoke and fire and fear. It was the look of someone who had seen the worst of humanity and had learned with brutal efficiency how to survive it. "Self-defense class," Sarah said, the faintest ghost of a sad smile touching her lips. "They have very good ones where I'm from." She turned and walked back into the cabin to check on the passengers, her posture once again that of a solicitous flight attendant. But no one on that plane, especially not the 3 men now securely bound in the rear galley, would ever see her that way again. The rest of the flight was eerily calm. The passengers, huddled in small groups, whispered among themselves. They stole glances at the flight attendant who moved among them, offering water and blankets, her touch gentle, her voice soothing. They looked at her as if she were a guardian angel who had descended from the heavens. She was the woman who had faced down a gunman without flinching. Lena and Mark flew the plane, their conversation stilted, on their minds still reeling. Mark kept looking back at the cabin door. "We need to report this, Lena, in detail. They'll want to know everything. They'll want to debrief her." "I know," Lena said quietly, "but something tells me she's not going to want to talk about it. Did you see her eyes, Mark, when she was talking to him? It was like she'd done this 100 times before." When they finally touched down at JFK, the plane was met not on the runway, but at a remote, isolated hard stand surrounded by law enforcement vehicles. The passengers were kept on board for another 2 hours as FBI agents, Port Authority police, and Homeland Security officials swarmed the aircraft. The 3 hijackers were taken away in stretchers and handcuffs. Then came the debriefings. Sarah was taken to a small windowless room in a terminal building, and across from her sat a senior FBI agent named David Miller and a woman in a dark suit who didn't introduce herself but had the unmistakable bearing of intelligence services. Agent Miller was all business. "Ms. Jenkins, we need to go over this step by step. Your actions were extraordinary. The preliminary reports from the passengers indicate you acted with remarkable speed and precision. Can you walk us through your training?" Sarah folded her hands in her lap. She told them about the standard CRM, crew resource management, training, about conflict de-escalation techniques, about the heavy coffee carafe, about using the hijacker's momentum against him. Agent Miller listened, taking notes. The woman in the dark suit just watched, her eyes never leaving Sarah's face. When Sarah finished, Agent Miller leaned back. "That's quite a story, but it doesn't quite explain how you managed to disarm a man with a box cutter without getting a scratch, or how you knew exactly where to strike a man with a coffee pot to render him instantly unconscious, or how you took down a man with a gun using a martial arts move that would make a Marine Corps instructor proud." Sarah met his gaze. "I've always been a quick learner, Agent Miller, and adrenaline does amazing things." The woman in the dark suit spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, but it carried weight. "Your background check is very clean, Ms. Jenkins. 10 years with the airline. Before that, a series of clerical jobs in the Midwest. Before that, a gap. A few years unaccounted for. Immigration records show you entered the U.S. from Canada, but your point of origin before that is unclear." Sarah's expression didn't change. "I led a quiet life. I moved around. People with quiet lives don't do what you did today," the woman said. "They freeze. They scream. They hide. They don't neutralize 3 armed men in under 2 minutes without breaking a sweat. So, and I'm going to ask you one more time, not as a formality, but because I need to understand who and what we're dealing with. Who are you?" The room was silent. The fluorescent lights hummed. Agent Miller shifted in his seat. Sarah looked down at her hands, still and calm in her lap. For a long moment, she said nothing. She could feel the walls of this new life crumbling around her. The carefully constructed identity, the years of quiet anonymity, and the escape from a past that was more nightmare than memory, it was all ending in this sterile room. She looked up, and this time, she didn't hide it. The weariness was there, stark and open. But so was a quiet, indomitable strength. She took a slow breath. "My name," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it filled the room, "is Sanja. Major Sanja Jankovic. I was a pilot in the Air Force of the Republic of Serbian Krajina, a country that no longer exists." She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "I flew 67 combat missions. I was shot down twice. I have killed people, and for the last 20 years I have been trying very hard to forget that." The silence that followed was absolute. The woman in the dark suit leaned forward, her expression no longer questioning, but one of profound, serious attention. Agent Miller's pen had stopped moving. Sanja continued, her voice even. "Today, when those men took over the cabin, I didn't see a hijacking. I saw an ambush. I didn't see passengers. I saw non-combatants in a kill zone. And I didn't react as a flight attendant. I reacted as a soldier. Because after all these years, that is what I still am." She looked from one face to the other. "So, that is your answer. Now, you need to decide what you're going to do with it. Will it be a medal or a deportation order?" She gave a small, sad shrug. "To be honest, after today, I'm not sure which one I'd prefer.